The ship leaves port just before midnight. You can hear the ropes straining against the dock, the shouts of the crew as they push off into open water. The man who paid for his passage is already below deck. He is not watching the coastline disappear. He is not standing at the rail the way passengers do when they leave something behind. He has gone as deep into the ship as the ship will allow, and he has lain down, and according to the text, in the middle of a storm that is terrifying professional sailors, he has fallen fast asleep. His name is Jonah, and he is running from God. But here is the thing about Jonah: he is not the first, he is not the last, and he is not even the most desperate. Because the Bible is full of runners. It begins with one. It ends with grace chasing the last of them down, and in between there is a pattern so consistent, so precise, so almost unbearable in its tenderness, that once you see it, you will never read these stories the same way again. Every one of them ran for a different reason. Fear, shame, grief, rage, exhaustion, the particular weight of a life that had gone somewhere they never intended. But there is one thing, one single thing, they all had in common at the moment they stopped running. We will get there, but not yet. We begin where the Bible begins, in a garden, before any ship, before any desert, before any fish or storm or courtyard fire. We begin with the first man who ever heard footsteps and decided to hide. His name is Adam, and the world he lives in up until this moment is perfect. Not perfect the way we use the word, meaning good enough, mostly fine, no major complaints. Perfect the way Genesis uses the word, tav miod, very good, the kind of good that does not yet know what bad is. The kind of good that has no word for grief because grief has not arrived yet. He walks with God in the cool of the day. That is not a metaphor. That is not poetry inserted to make the text feel warmer. That is a description of a relationship so unbroken, so unhidden that the creator of the universe and the creature made from dust simply walk together in the evening when the heat lifts, the way old friends do. And then one day, one choice, and everything that was open closes. They hear footsteps. And Adam, the man who used to walk toward those footsteps, turns and runs the other direction. He grabs his wife. He pulls leaves from a tree. He presses himself into the shadow of the garden and holds his breath. And then God speaks. 3 words in Hebrew, Ayeka, where are you? Here is what most people miss about that question. God is not asking for directions. He knows exactly where Adam is. He can see the fig leaves. He can see the shaking hands. The Hebrew word Anna, the root of that question, is not a geographical inquiry. It is an invitation. It is the sound of a door being left open by someone who has every right to slam it shut. Where are you? Not what did you do, not how could you, not even do you know what this is going to cost. Just a where are you? And Adam answers from the shadows with words that have echoed in human hearts for every generation since. I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid. Afraid, naked, hiddens. Write those 3 words down somewhere because you are going to hear them again. In a desert, on a ship, under a broom tree, in a courtyard in Jerusalem on the worst night of a fisherman's life. The pattern has begun. God does not drag Adam out of the bushes. He does not send lightning into the garden to flush him out. He asks a question and he waits. And when Adam and Eve come forward trembling, covered in leaves that are already wilting, there is a consequence. Of course there is. Actions have weight in a moral universe. But before the consequence, there is something else. God makes them clothes. Not leaves, not something temporary and fragile that will fall apart by morning. The text says God made garments of skin, which means something died. Which means before the first human beings were sent out into the hard world they had just chosen, God covered them with something that cost something. The first act of grace in the Bible happens in the same breath as the first act of running. Before the exile from the garden, before the angel with the flaming sword, before any of it, a God who was just betrayed by the people he made kneels down in the dirt and makes sure they are warm. That is the first pattern, and it will not be the last. 400 years pass. The world fills up. Empires rise, slaves are made. And in the palace of the most powerful man on earth, a Hebrew child is growing up with a name he did not choose, in a family that is not his family, in a world that does not know what to do with him. His name is Moses, and he is about to run. You know the broad outline. You may have seen it painted, filmed, illustrated, told to children in Sunday school with flannel figures on a board. But strip away everything you think you know and stand in the moment itself. Moses is 40 years old. He is educated in all the wisdom of Egypt. Josephus, the Jewish historian writing in the 1st century, tells us that Moses was not merely a student in Pharaoh's court but a military commander, a man of exceptional ability, a man the Egyptians themselves respected. He is, by every external measure, a success. And he knows who he is. Somewhere beneath the Egyptian name and the palace education and the linen robes, he knows he is Hebrew. He knows those people laboring in the brick fields are his people. And one day, walking among them, he sees an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew slave. He looks left, he looks right, and he kills the man. The next day, he tries to break up a fight between two Hebrew men, and one of them says something that lands like cold water in his face. Who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Are you going to kill me the way you killed the Egyptian? The word is out. And when Pharaoh hears, Josephus records that the order was personal, direct, a death warrant with Moses' name on it. Moses does the only thing that makes sense to a man standing at the edge of everything he has ever known. He runs. The Hebrew word the text uses is berach. It is not a calm departure. It is not a strategic relocation. Berach means to flee in panic, to bolt. It is the word used for an animal breaking from a trap, for a prisoner escaping chains. Moses does not walk away from Egypt. He runs, and he does not stop running until he reaches the far side of the desert, a place called Midian, where he sits down beside a well, exhausted and alone, and does not know what comes next. 40 years in a palace, 40 years in a desert, one impulsive act and a death warrant, and a man who is supposed to be somebody sits in the sand and watches goats. Stay with me, because what happens in those 40 years of sand is not nothing. Midian is not a place that appears on maps people frame and hang on walls. It is not the Nile Delta with its impossible green, not the palace courtyards with their carved stone and their smell of cedar oil. Midian is rock and scrub and wind and silence. It is the kind of place that strips a man down to whatever he actually is once everything he thought he was has been taken away. Moses spends 40 years there. Think about that number seriously. Not as a Bible number, not as a round figure that means a long time, 40 years. If Moses arrives in Midian at 40, he leaves at 80. Which means he spends more of his adult life in that desert than he ever spent in the palace that shaped him. He marries a woman named Zipporah. He has sons. He tends his father-in-law Jethro's flocks across ground that offers very little and asks everything of the people who try to live on it. And here is what most people leave out when they tell this story. Moses is not miserable in Midian. There is no text that says he paced the desert longing for Egypt, no record of him crying out to God to rescue him from the sand. He builds a life, a quiet one, a real one, a life that asks nothing more of him than to be present, to be faithful, to show up each morning and lead the flocks to wherever the water is. God does not appear to Moses in a vision in Midian. He does not send an angel with a message. He does not speak through a dream. For 40 years, silence. And then one ordinary morning on a mountain called Horeb, a bush catches fire and does not burn up. Moses turns aside to look. That phrase matters more than it seems. He turns aside. He interrupts his day. He does not file it away as a strange desert phenomenon and keep walking. He stops, he looks. And the moment he turns aside, the moment he gives his full attention, God speaks. Moses, Moses. The repetition of the name is not an accident. In Hebrew, when God calls a name twice, Abraham, Abraham, Jacob, Jacob, Samuel, Samuel, Moses, Moses, it signals intimacy. It signals urgency. It signals I see you specifically, not the category of you, not the role you play, you. And what does God say next? Not you wasted 40 years, not you failed Egypt, not do you have any idea what your impulsiveness cost. He says, I have seen the suffering of my people, I have heard their cry, I know their pain, and I am sending you. The man who ran from a death warrant is being sent back into the country that issued it. The fugitive, the berach, the panicked runner, is being called a deliverer. This is not because Moses became worthy in the desert. Moses spent 40 years becoming less impressed with himself, which turns out to be exactly the kind of preparation God prefers. The palace gave Moses confidence. The desert gave Moses something better. It gave him the knowledge that he was not sufficient for anything that actually mattered, which is the only starting point from which God can work. The man who ran was found, and being found was sent. Now go back to the ship. It is somewhere in the Mediterranean, likely heading toward what we now call Spain, and the storm has found it in the night. The sailors are experienced men. They are not frightened by ordinary weather. But this is not ordinary weather, and they know it, and they are throwing cargo overboard and crying out to their gods and doing everything they know to do, and none of it is working. And below deck, through all of it, Jonah sleeps. The captain shakes him awake. How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe your God will notice us and we won't die. There is something almost darkly comic in that line. The man who is running from God is being asked by a pagan sailor to pray to God, and Jonah cannot do it, because Jonah knows something the sailors do not. He knows why the storm is here. When they cast lots to find who is responsible and the lot falls on Jonah, because of course it does, Jonah tells them everything. I am a Hebrew. I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. And then the sentence that is almost too honest to be believed, I am running away from him. The 3rd century theologian Origen, writing his commentary on this text, made an observation that stopped me cold the first time I read it. He noted that Jonah is the only prophet in the entire Hebrew Bible who explicitly attempts to flee not from a mission but from the presence of God. Other prophets argued. Other prophets delayed. Jeremiah said he did not know how to speak. Isaiah said he was a man of unclean lips. But only Jonah got up, bought a ticket, and tried to physically put ocean between himself and the God who sent him. As if ocean would be enough. As if anywhere would be enough. But it gets stranger. Because when Jonah tells the sailors to throw him into the sea when he essentially chooses death over obedience, God does not let him die. The text says God provided a great fish. The Hebrew word is manna, appointed, prepared, assigned. This fish did not happen to be swimming by. This fish was sent. God, who Jonah is fleeing, sends a rescue vehicle into the ocean to catch the man before the ocean swallows him. The fish is not punishment. Read it again. The fish is the thing that keeps Jonah alive long enough to change his mind. 3 days in the dark, 3 days in a place that smells like the end of everything. And in that darkness, Jonah does the one thing he could not do on the ship. He prays, not a proud prayer, not a negotiating prayer. The kind of prayer that only comes out of a person who has nothing left to negotiate with. From the depths of the grave I called for help, and you listened to my cry. And the fish deposits him on dry land. The man who ran was caught, and being caught was sent. Pay attention to this, because the pattern is forming, and it is forming with a precision that should make something move in your chest. Adam ran into the trees. God walked into the garden and asked a question. Moses ran into the desert. God walked into the desert as fire and called his name twice. Jonah ran into the ocean. God walked into the ocean as a fish and brought him back breathing. Every time God moves toward the runner, not to destroy, not to punish first, to find. There is one more runner we have not met yet, 2 actually, and they are the ones who will break you open because they are not ancient, they are not remote, they are exactly, precisely, uncomfortably like you. But first there is a prophet under a broom tree, and what God does for him is so specific, so careful, so almost domestic in its tenderness that it deserves its own space. The day before Elijah runs, he does something no one in Israel has done in a generation. He stands on the top of Mount Carmel alone against 450 prophets of Baal, and he calls fire down from heaven, not metaphorical fire, not spiritual fire. Fire that falls from a clear sky and consumes a water-soaked altar so completely that it licks up the stones and the soil and the water standing in the trench around it. The people watching fall on their faces. The false prophets are seized. The drought that has held Israel in its grip for 3 years breaks open, and rain comes in sheets off the Mediterranean. It is the single most dramatic prophetic victory in the Old Testament. And the next morning, Elijah runs. A messenger arrives from Queen Jezebel, the woman who imported the prophets of Baal, the woman who has been hunting the servants of God for years, and the message is precise. By this time tomorrow you will be dead like them. And Elijah, who yesterday called fire from heaven, who stood alone against 450 men and did not blink, Elijah is afraid. The text does not soften it. It does not say he was concerned or troubled or that he wisely reassessed the situation. It says he was afraid, and he ran for his life. This is the part that gets left out of the highlight reel. We remember Carmel. We remember the fire. We do not always remember that the man who stood fearless before 450 enemies collapsed completely at the threat of one woman. We do not always sit with the fact that the greatest spiritual high in his ministry was followed within 24 hours by the deepest psychological low. But the Bible sits with it, and so should we. Elijah runs south, past Beersheba, into the wilderness, until his legs will not carry him anymore. And then he sits down under a broom tree, a low, scraggly desert shrub that offers almost no shade, and says something to God that is almost unbearable in its honesty. It is enough, Lord, take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. I am no better than my ancestors. Not I have done everything you asked and it was not enough. Not the victory yesterday was real and I deserve rest. Not even I am afraid and I need help. Just I am no better. I have reached the end of what I thought I was. I thought I was the man who could stand on the mountain and call fire. Turns out I am just a man sitting in the dirt under a shrub that barely blocks the sun, and I would like to stop. Then Elijah lies down and sleeps. And here is where it gets remarkable. God does not send a rebuke. He does not send a vision. He does not send a theological argument for why Elijah should get back up and keep going. He sends an angel, and the angel does one thing. He bakes bread. The text is almost shockingly domestic. He touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. Elijah eats, lies back down. The angel comes a second time. Get up and eat, for the journey is too great for you. The journey is too great for you. Not you are weak, and that is shameful. Not a man of your calling should not need this. Just the road ahead is long and you are depleted, and here is food and here is water, and you need to eat before you can go anywhere. God's first response to Elijah's breakdown is not a sermon, it is a meal. I want you to feel the weight of that. The God of the universe, whose glory shook Sinai, whose voice divided the Red Sea, whose fire just fell on Carmel, kneels down beside a burned-out prophet lying in the dirt under a desert shrub and makes sure he has eaten. This is not a small detail inserted for texture. This is the character of God on full display. He meets the body before he addresses the soul. He restores before he redirects. He feeds before he speaks. Elijah travels 40 days on the strength of that meal. He arrives at Horeb, the mountain of God, the same mountain where a bush burned for Moses, the same ground. He finds a cave and crawls inside. And God asks him the same kind of question he asked Adam in the garden, not a geographical question, not a punishing question, a pastoral one. What are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah answers from the cave the way Adam answered from the trees, with honesty that is also underneath the honesty a kind of accusation. I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. I am the only one left. He is wrong about this. God will tell him shortly that there are 7,000 in Israel who have not bowed to Baal. 7,000. Elijah is so deep inside his own exhaustion that he cannot see them. This is what burnout does. It narrows the visible world down to the size of a cave. It makes the one who is running feel like the only one who ever ran, the only one who ever failed, the only one for whom there is no way back. God does not correct him yet. First, something else. Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. And then the wind comes, the kind that splits mountains and shatters rocks, then an earthquake, then fire. 3 of the most dramatic natural forces on earth arriving in sequence, each one the kind of thing that in any other context would signal the presence of the Almighty. But God is not in the wind, God is not in the earthquake, God is not in the fire. After the fire, the Hebrew here is called Damama Daka. It is one of the most difficult phrases in the Old Testament to translate. Your Bible might say a still small voice, or a gentle whisper. But the most precise translation, the one that captures what the Hebrew actually says, is the sound of sheer silence. Not a whisper, silence. A silence so complete, so weighted, so different from the chaos that preceded it, that it is itself a sound. And when Elijah hears it, he wraps his face in his cloak and goes to stand at the entrance of the cave. Because he knows the wind was impressive, the earthquake was terrifying, the fire was spectacular, but the silence is personal. The silence is the kind of presence that does not need to announce itself with volume because it is not trying to overwhelm you. It is trying to reach you. God did not come in the earthquake for Elijah because Elijah had just survived the spiritual equivalent of an earthquake. God did not come in the fire because Elijah had just watched fire fall from heaven and it had not been enough to hold him together. God came in the one thing that Elijah's depleted, overstimulated, burned-out soul could actually receive. Silence. And in the silence, the same question asked again with the same patience as before. What are you doing here, Elijah? The runner, exhausted, wrong about almost everything, fed by an angel and hiding in a cave, is being asked not for a performance review but for a conversation. And then God gives him something Elijah did not ask for and did not expect. He gives him a name. Elisha, go find him, anoint him. You are not the only one, you were never the only one. The work is not finished and you are not finished, and the road you think has ended has only bent out of sight. The man who ran was found, and being found was given a companion for the road. Now the pattern is fully visible. Not partially visible, not suggested. Fully, unmistakably, undeniably visible. Adam ran into the garden's shadow. God asked a question and made him clothes. Moses ran into the desert for 40 years. God met him in a burning bush and called his name twice. Jonah ran into the sea. God sent a fish and delivered him to dry land. Elijah ran into the wilderness until his body gave out. God sent an angel with bread and met him in silence. Every single time, without exception, God's first move toward the runner is not punishment. It is presence, not correction first, not consequence first, presence first. Here is the part nobody tells you. The pattern is not just theirs. There is a courtyard in Jerusalem on the night of the 14th of Nisan, and a fire is burning in the middle of it. Servants and officials stand around it warming their hands. The night is cold, colder than people who have not been to Jerusalem in spring expect it to be. The city is packed with Passover pilgrims. Somewhere above this courtyard inside the high priest's house, a trial is happening that is not really a trial. And outside in the courtyard, among the servants and the soldiers and the firelight, a fisherman from Galilee stands with his hands stretched toward the flame. His name is Simon Peter, and he is running, not with his legs, with something quieter and more devastating than his legs. The Greek word Luke uses to describe where Peter is standing is makrathen, from a distance. He followed Jesus, but from a distance. Close enough to see what was happening, far enough to deny any connection to it. That single word contains an entire portrait of a soul caught between love and fear, between loyalty and survival, hovering in the space that is neither fully committed nor fully gone. We know what happens next. A servant girl looks at him across the firelight. This man was with him. Woman, I don't know him. A little later, another person, you also are one of them. Man, I am not. An hour passes, someone else, and this one noticed something. Certainly this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean. The accent, the vowels that give him away. The body cannot fully flee what the mouth tries to deny. Man, I don't know what you are talking about. And immediately, while the words are still in the air, a rooster crows. And Jesus turns and looks at Peter. That is in the text. Luke records it with 4 words. The Lord turned and looked, not looked away, not turned his back, turned toward, looked directly at the man who has just denied him 3 times in the space of an hour in the hearing of strangers by a fire in a courtyard, and looked at him. We do not know what that look contained. The text does not describe it. It does not say it was a look of anger or disappointment or accusation. It simply says Jesus looked at Peter, and Peter remembered, and Peter went outside, and Peter wept bitterly. Bitterly is the word, not quietly, not privately. The kind of weeping that breaks out of a person, grief that cannot be managed or contained or kept dignified, the kind that empties you out. This is Peter, the one who said hours earlier, even if all fall away, I will not, the one who drew a sword in the garden, the one who walked on water briefly before he looked at the waves, the one Jesus named Rock, lying on the ground outside a high priest's courtyard in the middle of the night, unable to stand up under the weight of what he has just done. And then silence, 3 days of it. The worst kind of running is not the running you do with your body. It is the running you do inside your own chest. Jonah could measure his distance from God in nautical miles. Moses could measure his in days of desert walking, but Peter's distance is measured in something that has no unit. It is the distance of a man who watched his friend die on a cross he could have been standing beside and was not, because he was busy denying he had ever met him. Augustine wrote in his Confessions, a book that is itself the record of a man who ran from God for 30 years, our heart is restless until it rests in thee. He was writing about himself. But he could have been writing about Peter in those 3 days between the courtyard and the empty tomb, a heart running laps inside a chest, restless, unable to land anywhere. Unable to go back, unable to go forward, unable to undo the 3 moments that now define everything. And then Sunday morning arrives, and the tomb is empty, and the risen Christ appears to Mary, to the disciples, to 500 people at once according to Paul's accounting. But there is one appearance that is not in the big dramatic moments, one appearance that happens quietly, specifically, almost privately. It is on a beach. John 21. The disciples have gone back to Galilee, back to the only life they knew before all of this began. Back to the boats and the nets and the sea that Peter has known since he was a boy. They fish all night and catch nothing. And in the early morning, a figure stands on the shore and calls out to them. Friends, don't you have any fish? They do not recognize him yet. He tells them to throw their net on the right side of the boat. The net fills immediately, 153 fish, John records, with a specificity that suggests someone counted them, which is exactly the kind of thing fishermen do. And the disciple whom Jesus loved says to Peter, "It is the Lord." And Peter, impulsive, ruined, grieving Peter, wraps his outer garment around him and jumps into the water. He does not wait for the boat to reach shore. He does not compose himself. He does not think through what he will say or how he will explain the courtyard or whether there is any way to reframe those 3 denials into something more defensible. He jumps. Now watch what happens next. When they reach shore, there is a fire burning, charcoal, bread, fish already cooking. Jesus has made breakfast. And the detail that John includes, the detail that is not accidental, not decorative, not simply local color, is the word for the kind of fire it is. The Greek word is anthrakia, a charcoal fire. It appears exactly twice in the entire New Testament. Once in John 18, in the courtyard of the high priest, where Peter stood warming his hands while he denied Jesus 3 times. And once here on this beach, where Jesus is making breakfast. John is not doing this by accident. John is one of the most deliberate writers in the ancient world. The same fire, the same warmth, the same smell of smoke and burning coal. Jesus has not chosen this detail carelessly. He has built a scene that smells like the worst night of Peter's life and filled it with food and morning light and his own presence, because he is not finished with Peter, and he wants Peter to know it in his body before he knows it in his mind. They eat, and when breakfast is finished, Jesus turns to Peter. Not to the group, to Peter. Simon, son of John, do you love me? 3 times he asks, once for each denial, not as punishment, not to humiliate, to replace, to take the 3 moments that Peter cannot stop replaying in the dark and lay something new over each one. Not erasure. Jesus does not pretend the courtyard did not happen, but restoration. A deliberate, specific, one-for-one restoration of the man who thought he had run too far to come back. Each time Peter answers, Jesus gives him something to do. Feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. The man who could not stand beside a courtyard fire is being handed the pastoral care of the entire early church. The denier is being made a shepherd. This is not because Peter earned it. Peter had not earned anything since the garden arrest. This is because the pattern that began with Adam in the trees has not changed in the thousands of years between Genesis and this beach in Galilee. The runner was found, and being found was trusted with something larger than himself. Eusebius, the 4th century church historian, records a tradition about the end of Peter's life that carries the full weight of this beach in John 21. When Peter was arrested in Rome under Nero and sentenced to crucifixion, he made one request of his executioners. He asked to be crucified upside down. He was not worthy, he said, to die in the same position as his Lord. The man who once could not admit to a servant girl that he knew Jesus died insisting with his body on the difference between himself and the one he loved. Not from shame, from reverence. From the knowledge that what had been given to him on that beach was not something he had deserved or manufactured or recovered through his own effort. It had been given freely, specifically, by a man who built a charcoal fire on a beach because he knew the smell would reach something in Peter that words alone could not. And now we can open the thing we closed at the beginning. Every one of them ran for a different reason. Adam ran from shame, Moses ran from consequence, Jonah ran from calling, Elijah ran from exhaustion, Peter ran from fear. Different reasons, different directions, different deserts and oceans and caves and courtyards. But here is what they all had in common at the moment they stopped running. Not one of them found God. God found them. Adam did not climb out of the bushes and present himself. God walked into the garden and asked a question. Moses did not return to Egypt with a plan. God appeared in a bush and issued a commission. Jonah did not swim back to shore. God sent a fish. Elijah did not recover his strength and march back to the fight. God sent an angel with bread and met him in silence. Peter did not arrange a reconciliation meeting with Jesus. Jesus built a fire on a beach and made breakfast and waited. Not one of them's not one's. Every single reunion in this story is initiated by God. Every single finding is done by the one who was not lost. Every distance is crossed from the same direction, not from the runner toward God, but from God toward the runner. This is not a collection of inspiring comeback stories. This is a portrait of a God who does not wait to be found, who does not stand at a fixed point and hope you eventually turn around, who moves, who pursues, who builds fires on beaches and bakes bread in deserts and asks questions in gardens and sends fish into oceans with the same relentless, specific, almost unreasonable insistence on reaching the person who ran. You already know which one you are. You did not need me to list them. You did not need the Hebrew words or the historical sources or the careful architecture of 5 stories laid end to end. Somewhere in the middle of this, maybe in the garden, maybe on the ship, maybe on that beach in the early morning with the smell of charcoal smoke, something moved in you. A recognition. The particular discomfort of seeing yourself in someone you thought you were only studying. Because the runners in this story are not ancient, they are not remote, they are not figures in a stained glass window that you admire from a pew at a respectful distance. They are you, they have always been you. And the reason these stories have survived every empire and every century and every attempt to reduce them to mere literature is precisely because they refuse to stay in the past. They keep arriving in the present. They keep finding the specific shape of the specific fear you are carrying right now and saying, yes, that one, I know that one. Maybe you ran from shame, the thing you did or the thing that was done to you or the thing you became so slowly you did not notice until it had already defined you, and the idea of being fully known by anyone, including God, feels less like comfort and more like exposure. So you stay in the shadow of the garden, you keep the distance. You tell yourself you will come back when you are cleaner, when you have handled it, when you are more of what you think you are supposed to be. Maybe you ran from calling. Not because you stopped believing, but because what you were asked to do felt too large and too costly, and the direction you were pointed was exactly the direction you did not want to go. So you bought a ticket for Tarshish. Not in a literal sense, but you know what your Tarshish is. You have known for a while. It is the thing you keep moving away from, the conversation you keep not having, the step you keep finding reasons to delay. Maybe you ran from exhaustion. You gave everything you had to something that mattered, your family, your faith, your work, the people in your life who needed more than you had, and the victory came, and then immediately afterward the threat came, and you found yourself under a broom tree with nothing left and a prayer that sounded more like surrender than faith. It is enough. I cannot do this anymore. Maybe you ran from failure. Not the small ordinary failures that everyone accumulates and eventually forgives themselves for, but the specific, irrevocable kind. The courtyard kind. The kind where you know exactly what you did and you know exactly when you did it, and you know that the person you did it to saw your face when you did it. And you have been running the replay ever since, and the distance between who you were in that moment and who you want to be feels less like something to cross and more like something to live with. Whatever your reason, whatever your direction, the pattern holds. Here is what the Bible does not say anywhere in any of these stories. It does not say that God helped the people who had it mostly together. It does not say that God pursued the ones who had stopped running on their own first. It does not say that the fish arrived after Jonah repented, or that the bread appeared after Elijah proved he was ready to get back up, or that Jesus built the fire on the beach only after Peter had processed his grief sufficiently and composed a suitable apology. None of that is in the text, none of it. What is in the text is a God who moves first, who asks the question before the confession, who bakes the bread before the recommission, who builds the fire before the restoration conversation, who sends the fish before the prayer, whose first move in every single case is not to wait for the runner to stop running but to go. The theological word for this is prevenient grace, the grace that comes before, the grace that arrives ahead of your turning around, that is already in motion toward you before you have decided to move toward it. John Wesley preached it for 50 years. Augustine described it from the inside, a man who spent 3 decades running from God and could not, looking back, identify a single moment when God was not already pursuing him. You have made us for yourself, Augustine wrote, and our heart is restless until it rests in thee. Restless, not broken beyond repair, not disqualified, not too far gone, restless. The way a compass is restless when it is pointed away from north, not because it has failed at being a compass, but because it is made for a direction it is not yet facing. And the moment it is released, the moment the hand holding it away from north lets go, it swings. Not slowly, not reluctantly, it swings. You are not the exception to this pattern. That is not encouragement offered as a pleasantry. That is a theological statement grounded in 5 stories that span the entire length of the Bible, from the first garden to the last beach, from the first man who hid in trees to the fisherman who jumped into the water because he could not wait for the boat. The pattern does not have an asterisk. It does not say God pursues every runner except the one whose failure was too specific, whose distance was too great, whose particular combination of shame and doubt and delay has finally exhausted even divine patience. There is no asterisk. There has never been an asterisk. There is one more thing. When God found each of these runners, he did not find them and leave them where they were. He found Adam and covered him and gave him a future outside the garden. He found Moses and gave him a burning bush and a mission and a name that Israel would speak for 3,000 years. He found Jonah and deposited him on dry land and gave him the same calling he had been running from, and this time Jonah went, and an entire city turned back to God. He found Elijah and fed him and met him in silence and gave him a companion and told him the work was not finished. He found Peter on a beach and built him a fire and gave him back his name and his purpose, and the pastoral care of something larger than anything he had managed before. Not one of them was found and left unchanged. Not one of them was located, patched up, and returned to exactly what they were before they ran. Not one of them was simply restored to zero. Every finding in this story is also a transformation. Every rescue is also a recommission. Every meal in the desert is also a preparation for a road the runner does not yet know they are about to walk. Which means, and hear this carefully, the thing waiting for you on the other side of your running is not just relief. It is purpose. The specific, particular, irreplaceable thing that only you, with your history, with your failure, with the exact shape of the wound you are carrying, are positioned to do. Moses could not have led the Israelites if he had not spent 40 years learning the desert they would have to cross. Jonah could not have reached Nineveh if he had not spent 3 days in the dark learning what it felt like to need mercy before he could preach it. Peter could not have shepherded the early church if he had not known from the inside what it felt like to fail completely and be found anyway. Your running is not wasted. Your desert is not a detour. Your cave is not the end of the story. It is, in fact, if the pattern holds, and the pattern always holds, the place where you are about to hear a sound of sheer silence. And in the silence, a question asked with more patience than you deserve and more tenderness than you expected. Where are you? Not as accusation, as invitation, the door left open by someone who has every right to close it. So let me leave you with three things. Not three steps, not three techniques for managing the distance between you and God, not a formula that works if you apply it correctly and fails if you do not. Three things that are simply true, that have been true across every story we have looked at today, and that will still be true tomorrow morning when you wake up and the running feels easier than the turning around. The first is this. Running is exhausting in a way that nothing else is. Not physically, though Elijah's body gave out under a broom tree and Moses aged 40 years in a desert and Jonah nearly drowned. The exhaustion runs deeper than physical. It is the exhaustion of maintaining distance from the thing you were made to be near. It is the exhaustion of the compass held away from north, of the fig leaves that need replacing every morning, of the sleep that Jonah slept on the ship, deep, desperate, the sleep of a man trying to be unconscious to his own situation. You cannot outrun this. No one ever has. The distance does not get more comfortable with time. The cave does not get warmer. The ocean does not get calmer. What changes, if anything changes, is only your tolerance for the cold, and that is not the same as warmth. The good news, and it is very good news, is that you do not have to manufacture the energy to turn around. You do not have to work up the courage to come back. You do not have to fix yourself first, or reach a certain threshold of regret, or say the right words in the right order before God will consider moving. He is already moving. He was moving before you finished reading that sentence. The question God asks every runner is not, "Are you ready?" It is the same question he asked in the garden, under the same sky with the same patience. Where are you? The second thing. God's first response to every runaway is not punishment, it is presence. I know that some of you have been taught otherwise. I know that for some of you the God you grew up with was primarily a God of consequence, a God whose first move toward the person who failed was correction, whose primary language was disappointment, whose presence felt less like a garden walk and more like a courtroom. And I am not standing here to tell you that actions have no weight or that the choices we make do not shape the lives we live. But I am telling you, on the authority of a garden and a desert and an ocean and a broom tree and a beach in Galilee, that consequence is not God's first word to the runner. It has never been his first word. His first word is a question that is really an invitation. His first move is bread baked over coals by an angel. His first gesture is a fire built on a beach that smells like the worst night of your life, filled with morning light and the smell of fish cooking, and a voice that says, "Come and have breakfast." Come and have breakfast. Before the restoration conversation, before the three questions, before the commission and the calling and the road ahead. First, come, sit down, eat something. The journey is too great for you and you need to eat before you can go anywhere. That is the God of this book. That is the God of every runner in this story, and he has not changed between the garden and this moment. Not once, not for any of them, not for you. The third thing, and this is the one I want you to carry. The distance you think separates you from God is exactly the distance he is already crossing to reach you. Not approximately, not roughly, exactly. The ocean Jonah put between himself and Nineveh, God crossed it in the body of a fish. The desert Moses put between himself and Egypt, God crossed it in the body of a flame. The wilderness Elijah put between himself and the fight, God crossed it in the body of an angel with bread and a jar of water. The courtyard Peter put between himself and the arrest, God crossed it in the body of a risen man who built a fire on a beach on a cold morning in Galilee, because he knew that is where Peter would go when he had nowhere else to go. The distance is not the obstacle. The distance is the place where God is already walking toward you. Adam thought the trees would hide him. They did not hide him. They were just trees in a garden where God was already walking, already asking, already holding in his hands the garment he was about to make. You are not hidden, you have never been hidden. You are simply, to use the only word that fits, found, already found. Found before you turned around. Found before you decided to stop running. Found in the specific place where you are, under the specific weight you are carrying, by the specific God who has been crossing the distance since before you knew there was a distance to cross. If this has reached something in you today, if somewhere in the middle of Adam's garden or Elijah's broom tree or Peter's beach, you recognized yourself, I want to ask you to do one thing. Not 10 things, not a program or a process or a 90-day plan. One thing. Stop running long enough to hear the question. It is being asked right now, in whatever cave or courtyard or ocean you are in, with the same patience and the same tenderness and the same open door that it has always been asked with. Where are you? Answer honestly, that is all. You do not need the right words. Adam did not have the right words. Elijah did not have the right words. Peter did not have the right words, and Jesus built him a fire anyway and asked him the same question 3 times until something in him came back to life. You do not need to be ready, you only need to be honest. And if you found something real in this today, share it with someone who is running. You probably know someone, we all know someone. Because the pattern that runs through this entire book is not just ancient history. It is happening right now, in real time, in the lives of people who are sitting under broom trees and sleeping on ships and pressing themselves into the shadow of trees with fig leaves that are already wilting. Send this to them, not because a video needs the views, because they need to know that the distance they are in is not the end of the story. It is, in fact, if the pattern holds, and the pattern always holds, exactly where God is already standing. Augustine ends his Confessions, 30 years of running, 30 years of God pursuing, 30 years of a restless heart finally finding what it could not manufacture for itself, with a question of his own. Not a statement, not a conclusion, a question. He asks God, who shall enable me to rest in thee? Not I have arrived, not I have figured it out, not the running is behind me and I am certain it will never return. Just who will enable me to rest? And the answer in the grammar of everything we have looked at today is not something you produce. It is something you receive. It is the bread the angel bakes, the fire on the beach. The question in the garden asked by someone who already knows where you are and is asking anyway, because the asking is the reaching, and the reaching is the finding, and the finding is the beginning of everything that comes after. Rest is not the absence of the road. It is the presence of the one who walks it with you. Our heart is restless until it rests in thee.